Well, let's get into your new book because we're already there.
Sure.
Your new book is all about VR
Yeah.
and the future history of VR is what is that's
Oh,
what
it's
it's
called
called, right?
the History of the Future.
Okay, history of the future VR. What made you decide, like, because console wars, one thing that's always going through the console wars, the majority of the book is Sony. I was like, if he's gonna make a sequel this book, it'd be with Sony, right? He has to go with PlayStation. He
Right.
spent so much time on it, and then I read up and it's VR. I'm like, well, I mean, Sony's in VR.
Yeah. Oh, they are. Yeah. Well, it's kind of interesting because a lot of people ask if I'm going to write a sequel to Console Wars, like a direct sequel like that,
Mm-hmm.
and it's it's definitely something that at some point in my life I would like to do. But at the same time, what drove me to write Console Wars, as you know, was like I didn't set out to write Console Wars. I was more just curious about like what had happened, and I fell in love with the character of Tom Kalinske, and that kind of took me into it. So I would much rather want to write a story that would be like a sequel if I knew the story first. Like if it was like, oh, here is a character at Sony, or here is a specific circumstance or series of circumstances, and I'm sure that they exist. I just haven't done the legwork yet, which is all a long way of saying that if someone else were to write it, I'd be just as happy to read it as I would be to write it. And I didn't know what the next book was going to be. It's hard because writing a book, at least the way that I like to do it, where it is narrative nonfiction, but it also is so historical. So it's not just a straight up like story. There is a lot of time and research devoted to it. Anyway, so basically, I know that if I'm going to work on something, it's going to take 2, 3, or 4 years of my life. And when you really start thinking about stories, even ones that fascinate you, that's a tough litmus test. Like, do I want to wake up every day for the next 3 years and work on this thing? Is that going to sustain me? Is that going to be interesting enough? So I kind of struggled to figure out what should be the next book. And actually, let me pull this up. One thing I was considering was writing about Angry Birds, and I
Oh
actually,
Jesus!
yeah, I met with Rovio, and they actually sent me that book, and I think it was either Comic Con or E3 in 2014, the year that Console Wars came out. I don't remember which one, but I was having lunch there with Tom Kalinske, Al Nelson, and Michael Kiraz, who's the son of a character in the book, and also a good friend of mine. And I was telling them, they're like, "What are you gonna write next?" And I was like, "Oh well, this Angry Birds thing might be there." And Tom and I were like, "No." I'm like, "What? You don't like Angry Birds?" They're like, "No, Angry Birds is fine. We like it." But they're like, you know, you got to do bigger story, something bigger. And they're like, "What else?" And I was like, "I don't know. I kind of, I have been a little bit interested in VR. We tried the Oculus DK1, or maybe it was DK2 then, and they were like, "Oh yeah, you should write about VR. You should write about Oculus." So I thought, like, all right, that's if Tom and Al, they know their marketing stuff, they have a good sense of story,
Mm-hmm.
so that helped push me in that direction. And so what happened was, what initially got me interested in it was actually that there was an article about me in Popular Mechanics that it was about Console Wars.
But yeah, but popular mechanics,
Well,
like
they do like science and tech stuff. But anyway, yeah. So they reached out and asked if for me to like do an interview, and they even did a photo shoot, and that was like all really crazy for me. I'd never been in a magazine before. I'd never had like photos
mm-hmm.
of me taken. And so it was like a really big deal. My dad even came because he's a big Popular Mechanics fan, and it was like very surreal. Like, oh, my son's going to be in this magazine. So we're all really excited about, me appearing in a magazine. And I remember it was Mother's Day in 2014, and the magazine came out, and I was out with my family, and I thought like, oh, let me go to the bodega and see if the magazine is out. And it was, and so it was like supposed to be this big exciting thing of like, oh, look, Mom, like I'm in a magazine. But I was so much more fascinated by the cover of the magazine, which was Palmer Luckey, the founder of Oculus.
Okay.
And I was like, so I thought it was significant that like on this moment that was like I'm supposed to be into myself and like wanting like, you know, this proud moment. I was like so much more fascinated to read about Palmer and Oculus and what they were doing, and that really planted the seed. And then that was you know, started to grow a little bit with advice from Tom and Al, and also actually trying their headset. And it was really, you know, in addition to trying to find a story that I knew I wanted to spend a few years working on, part of that too was what is a story that is going to be important, or that I think is going to be important. You know, the subtitle of Console Wars is Sega and Nintendo, the battle that defined a generation. And that's, you know, a little bit tongue in cheek, but it was such a big cultural and pop cultural battle. And out of that story between Sega and Nintendo, we see that it changed the video game industry. You know, even if Sega's not around or Nintendo no longer has 90% of the market, like the influence of that battle actually made a big indent on the gaming industry. And so, so with virtual reality, you know, I didn't know if Oculus was going to be able to pull this off, and if they were going to be able to do so within the span of when I would be writing the book. But I did feel like virtual reality, for anyone who tries it, for most people who try it, you know, you come away thinking like, wow, this is the future. You don't even know what that means. It's just like, this is real. This is good enough. It's only going to get better from here. Yeah. And so I really wanted to dive into that world. And as with Console Wars, it really was another crazy, awesome, true life story, mostly about a group of people coming together and trying to do something. And it's interesting too, because like, you know, like Sega, there is a big underdog element to Oculus. It's this company founded by a 19-year-old kid at the time who has this vision of bringing back this technology that has failed so many times in the past. But he's got an invention, and he's got a contagious passion and curiosity that seem to give it a chance to succeed. And also just timing wise, you know, where we are with computers and electronics and all these different components gives it a chance to succeed. But like, whereas Sega is an underdog throughout most of the book, obviously they do surpass Nintendo at some point, but they're still, you know, the same team that brought them there. You know, Oculus is a different situation because like midway through the story, they do get acquired by Facebook for a few $1 billion, and that does change the perception. It also changes what they're capable of accomplishing. So, you know, that's just a very interesting wrinkle to this story. And that also kind of took me more into a Silicon Valley direction, in addition to like the video game direction.
Okay, so like, what's your take on VR though? I mean, like right now we have 3 VR headsets on the market. You know, you got Oculus, HTC Vive, and well, I got behind me the PlayStation one. Yeah. Which one do you think is like the most? Is the most successful now? Is the PlayStation one? Obviously, you know, with PS4 and all that. But do you think in the coming years, do you think HTC or Oculus will surpass it, or do you think it's just going to be the PlayStation for now?
That's a good question. I think it also really, well, obviously depends on a lot of things, but I think it also kind of gets into this idea of like what VR is going to be, where the killer apps are going to be. And what I mostly mean is like, is it going to be in video games, or is it going to be in other areas like communication or productivity? And so I think that what's great about the PlayStation VR thing, and that's awesome about Sony investing the time and money into VR, and what it's going to continue to position them for years to come, is that I don't think VR is going to leave gaming. I think it's, you know, there's so much great stuff you can do. And we already see that the Vive and the Rift are being used for things other than gaming. Not to say that they're not great for gaming too. They're probably actually even better. I mean, they're both more expensive systems. Yeah. But like, you know, Facebook does own Oculus, and they are a social network, and they have some great social apps. And you know, the Vive launched with Tilt Brush, and has really, you know, I know, you know, some people in professional settings that use Vive for like modeling and stuff like that. So I guess we'll see. I guess it seemed like the real answer to your question is, you know, if you look at it like a console war type thing between Oculus, HTC, and Sony, who's going to win? I just think that like that's not even really what the question is, because things are going to change so much over the next 5 years that those are not going to be the only players. You know, Microsoft just launched a bunch of VR headsets. We're also going to really get more into like augmented reality and this convergence between VR and AR. So So I don't really know. And Google as well. They launched originally the cardboard, the really really cheap way of getting into VR to give people their first VR experience, and then they launched Daydream, and that's relevant too because as of now, there's basically like two types of VR experiences. There's the PlayStation one, which is $400, or I don't know what it is now. The Rift, which is $400, and the Vive, which is $500 or $600. But you need a PC. So you either need a console to play the PlayStation 1 or a PC for the Rift and the Vive. So, it's a significant investment, but then you also have mobile VR. So, and that is very cheap if you have a phone that's compatible. And then basically where we're going to be heading very soon, and which Oculus demoed at like their Oculus Connect thing, is just a standalone device. So we can kind of think about it like a mobile VR thing, but you don't have to buy the phone. Or as I was telling my wife last night, it's basically like a laptop that you wear on your face. It's a fully functioning computer, and Oculus has announced that they're going to start selling it for $200, next year. I mean, that takes us pretty far to the next step of where VR is headed. So I feel like answering the questions, who's going to win or what can we kind of expect, it's going to be so much dependent on the success of that sort of thing and who else gets into that market.
Yeah. Well, truthfully, like if in terms of like that, I think Oculus is going to make up a lot of ground. Like, because right now I think Oculus is the worst selling right now, isn't it? Like PlayStation's up top, and then I think HTC has got them beat.
Well, it's tough too because, I think like the PlayStation has sold more than 1 million, maybe almost 2 million headsets, and Vive and Rift significantly less. But the best selling of all the things has been the Samsung Gear VR.
Yeah.
So and that's like powered by Oculus, or at least that has like the Oculus Store. And I know that at one point, like last year, they had 4 million active users a month. So yes, I think that the Rift, at least prior with last statistics, was worse selling than Vive. But I think that their ecosystem is larger than everyone's at this point. So anyway, but
I think that like I was like, yeah, what you said. I think Oculus is doing it the smart way, where they partnered with Samsung, and 90% of the times when you go and you see any HTC or any AVR thing, it's always Oculus powered. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, and if you go to your local Best Buy, sometimes they have like things where you can experience Oculus, and it's cool and all. And I've experienced, like I said, PlayStation VR. I experienced the HTC Vive, and I experienced Oculus, but it just. For now, I think the technology is getting there, but for games especially, I don't think it's there quite yet. I feel like the best one for gaming is the PlayStation one because I got to play that PlayStation Resident Evil demo, and that's great. But at the same point in time, you can tell it's a little janky. It doesn't work as good. It doesn't run as good. But like Sony has stated, they're viewing this as like the launch of the PlayStation 1. So this VR is like the PlayStation 1 VR.
Right, and that's like a super fascinating aspect of this book that I didn't necessarily realize getting into it. Like I think at the end of the day, we all know, as either historians or just as gamers, that what sells the console is the games. It should be able to do cool shit, but like unless you have good games, it's worthless. And whether, going back to the launch of the PlayStation 1 or even the Genesis in my book, the interesting thing, the thing that we kind of take for granted is that gaming exists. Like, people are making games because if not for the Genesis or the PlayStation, there are other options out there that if you make a good game, you're probably going to make millions of dollars. That's not necessarily the case with VR. And since these games take a year or 2 years or 3 years to make, you have companies like HTC and Valve and Oculus and Sony meeting with developers, and imagine 2 years ago, before these things have launched, and saying, "Hey, developer, instead of spending your time working on this new AAA title or this new game that you can make millions on, we want you to work for this new medium that has zero install base." And even if you sold imagine if a game came out on PlayStation VR and it sold to every single headset. That's 2 million headsets. That's like amazing. best case
Yeah.
scenario. But that's still nothing compared to what you have with some of these big titles that are, you know, GTA and stuff like that. So it's just, you know, it's this really hard chicken and egg situation where you can't have the hardware is not going to sell unless the software is good, and the software is not going to be made unless there's an install base with the hardware. So that's kind of become one of the more fascinating aspects of writing this book. Like, how do these companies try to accommodate that? And in some ways, they subsidize it. They continue to take a big loss. They're investing money. And I think that, like you're saying, you see Oculus everywhere, and that is because they have made the biggest investment in this. You know, you can agree or disagree with their decisions or their approach to how they're trying to do this. But I think that regardless, as a fan of gaming, as a fan of VR, it's pretty admirable that they are putting so much money where their mouth is. And you know, I guess we'll see the fruition of that in the next few years.
Well, like I was talking to a guy at GameStop when I was waiting for Mario Odyssey, and I was talking to him, and I said, I think for now PlayStation's gonna stay ahead, but you're gonna see Oculus and Vive like start to pull ahead when the cost starts coming down for the headsets. When
Right.
you know, because PC gaming's on the rise. Like that's what
Right.
that was the news 3 years ago. That's the news today,
Right.
and you can still see that today. And like more and more people are buying PCs. You can go to Best Buy now and buy a VR ready PC that can play Oculus or
Right.
HTC. And I feel like when you know, and obviously technology's getting cheaper, so that technology to make your VR capable PC is getting cheaper. So when all that comes down, and then like I think I'm kind of curious to see what HTC is going to do in the next couple of years because they're the most expensive one on the market, and Oculus, if HTC doesn't do anything, Oculus will just pull that right ahead because I got my Samsung VR and that's run off Oculus. I'm already familiar with it, which is a great
Right.
idea by Oculus.
Yeah.
You know. And if HTC doesn't do anything soon, or like maybe in the next year or two, I think HTC might bow out. You see, and I don't know. I think Oculus is pretty much in there to stay. But HTC is one of those that I'm wary of because I'm thinking you don't hear much on the news. It's always Oculus or PlayStation and HTC.
Yeah.
Well, it's the second actual VR headset, the second best selling. It's got a price drop. That's it.
Right, and that's tough because I mean, I love the Vive. There's so much that's great about it, and it was great that they launched with with wands, with hand controllers at a time when the Oculus Rift did not have that. I think that's such a pivotal part of the experience that a lot of people appreciated that, rightfully so. But Oculus is backed by Facebook. They have a lot of resources, and they are able to be very competitive with the pricing. Whether that means selling at a loss or at cost or subsidizing other things. And HTC, we see, we can all agree that they made a great piece of hardware and that they are doing a great job of supporting it. But they are, have historically been a mobile company, and they have had some struggles in recent years. So it does put their fate in a little bit more of a perilous situation. So it is difficult to kind of see where the landscape's going to go.
Yeah. But so what you're saying is we kind of got like a Nintendo versus Sega situation.
Well, it's really fascinating because a lot of people have asked me could there be like another Nintendo, or who would be the next? Who would be like the next Sega, like an upstart hardware company, either in console gaming or we saw a few years ago with Ouya, which was. Yeah, well, but it was they made $8 million on Kickstarter. They were a huge deal at the time.
Oh yeah.
So it was $100 Android-based micro console for your living room, and the answer to that is just it's so hard. Back then, the R&D costs were very heavy for Sega and Nintendo, but now they're in the billions. It used to be in the hundreds of millions. So for a company to come out of nowhere and really compete with Microsoft or Sony or Windows or any of these things, it just seems very unlikely.
Sorry, my sweatshirt was bugging me.
That's all right.
Yeah, but I mean, there is one that we haven't really talked about. Do you talk about the HoloLens in the book at all? Like, do you dabble in AR, or is it just VR?
No, I talk about the HoloLens, and especially because, as we see with the few headsets launched, I think this month or last month, Microsoft is getting into VR. And at the end of the day, the technologies, or just for your viewers and listeners, virtual reality is you put on a headset and it's a completely immersive experience in a computer-generated world. Like the Matrix in the most extreme form, where you're transported to somewhere else. Whereas augmented reality, AR, is you put on a headset or even like a pair of glasses and you're fully existing in our current world, but you're, you have computer generated images overlaid. So it's like the Terminator vision. It's like, oh, that's this guy. Here's his address. Here's his likes on Twitter. And like, so in the end, those technologies that seem very different kind of do converge at some point, because it is just the idea of 3D possible graphics existing, and it's a 3D world, and it's just a matter of how much virtual and computer generated content is around you, and so you can see, like we see with AR now with Pokemon Go, which is a very it's not the full promise of augmented reality, but that is our real world, but it's introducing like virtual characters and other things that you share with other people. So anyway, the HoloLens is definitely going to be mentioned in the book. It's not a huge part of the narrative. I think that in the same way that we've seen a lot of hype and excitement for VR over the past 5 years, we're starting to see that with augmented reality, and probably that will be the case in the next few years with Microsoft HoloLens, with Magic Leap seemingly eventually launching something. Then you even have other unexpected players like Snapchat, or the company Snap released Spectacles, which was kind of like a dipping a toe in that direction. But it's all just this wearable technology, and it'll be interesting to see where we go.
Yeah, I mean, like right now we're just in its infancy. Like all the headsets came out like a year ago, wasn't it? Like Oculus, HTC, and PlayStation, they all launched last year, I want to say.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, like PlayStation. Oculus launched at the end of March in 2016. HTC Vive launched the first week of April 2016, and then PlayStation launched in the fall of 2016. And that's what's like so cool about it. That in a worst case scenario, everything we're seeing is just a great proof of concept. You're old enough to have lived through the introduction of many different technologies, and usually at first when these things come out, they're like not that impressive. You're like, all right, I could see like one day, I'm just thinking of like early smartphones. Like you're like, I can see how one day, but even when we try these headsets today, we can see it. It just doesn't work as seamlessly, or it's not as integrated with other people. It's not a big part of our life, but like it's very impressive to think of this as like Gen 1 of wherever we're headed. And I'm very happy about the progress that's been made in such a short time.
Yeah, like my thing is, I bought that headset day one. That was my, I was there midnight launch. I played it the next day for like 5 hours, and maybe I played 3 hours since. But I bought it knowing that was going to be the case, because I was like, this is something that's brand new. Developers aren't going to want to support it right away. They want to see where this goes. But I'm there because I want to see like they did the Spider-Man experience. And,
right.
The guys who made Until Dawn. I don't know. Have you played Until Dawn? Like the play Until Dawn. Like that is a Halloween game. It's awesome. My sister played it, but like they made a game that kind of is like a shooter, like those arcade shooters. And they made that game, and I got that. It's cool. Like there's experiences on there that's cool. Like with the Batman one, that's an awesome experience. But for now, there's nothing there that's like, I want that. Right. Doom's interesting me. I might pick up Doom in the next month, but I'm not gonna pay $60 for it.
Right. Yeah, it'll be. That's the thing. It's like I've been working on this book for 3 years now, and there's always people talking about like what's the killer app going to be, and I think it's fair to say that at this point and within the scope of my book, it doesn't exist yet, or maybe it'll never exist. Like, I don't know. When like there's definitely a lot of parallels between the virtual reality revolution and like the personal computer revolution, and I don't know like what the killer app for personal computers was. It was a lot of things, but I don't know that there was ever that thing that was like, oh my god, I gotta get Microsoft Word, like I gotta get this thing. It was more a matter of appealing to
I gotta get Linux, I gotta get Lynx, I gotta get Linux. Right. It's gotta be there. It was
just more a matter of like there's so much available, and it's more just about it being a tool that maybe I don't need Microsoft Word, but hey, I can now write a book instead of using a typewriter. So, like, giving a lot of different options and giving these tools to people and letting them, explore with it.
Well, as much as I would like the future of the VR to be like Sword Art Online, I don't know if you know that
Yeah.
anime.
Yes,
Yeah.
of course.
As much as I would like that to be the future, I don't think VR's future lies in gaming. I think it lies in the educational purposes. Like, oh, okay, maybe we make just a little headset like you said Oculus is making, or HTC makes a headset that is just you put it on. It's its own little thing, and it just streams HD video, and you can like be in a boxing match, or you can go visit the 16th Chapel, or Rome, or just something like that. I think that's going to be a lot more appealing than anything else. And then there's also like the other things that people like to do you can get on your PlayStation and HTC, but I'm not going to get into that now.
Right. Well, yeah, I mean, I think that one interesting way to think about where we're headed with all this, whether it's augmented reality or virtual reality, is like in the background here, I have a television playing with a football game. I don't remember how much I paid for the television, but let's say I paid $1,000. If I'm just wearing a pair of glasses and an augmented reality or even a virtual reality can give me a 30-inch television for the cost of a $1 app, now we're talking about not needing to purchase physical goods and your screen basically being these different apps as opposed to this thing. And imagine, it's not hard to imagine getting to a point where, all right, there's already some great cinema experiences. So like, let's say I put on a headset to watch Inception on a movie theater on like a 100-foot screen, an IMAX screen, a virtual IMAX screen, and then my brother, who's in Colorado, he puts it on too, and I sit next to him in the theater. Like that seems like that's a very conceivable thing to imagine. And for the cost of VR headset, we're getting this like IMAX experience. This thing that we couldn't fit in our homes, and so I do think that like the social component is going to be a huge part of it, and maybe like gaming is such a social. Social is such a big element of gaming that like, I've said in the past, someone asked me like, do I think Mario franchise, will that come to VR? And that's hard to predict because Nintendo is, they're
Nintendo.
Yeah, they're Nintendo. So I would never predict anything with them. But I said to them, like, whether or not there's like a Mario game in the next few years, one thing that would be cool is like if you and I are going to meet, we're going to do another podcast. Instead of meeting like my home and your home, like if we could just meet at in the Mushroom Kingdom and we're just like hanging out there. Like I feel like that'd be a really chill place to like
just hang out.
Like Goombas are just walking by, and like that's the kind of thing that is so easy to make happen in VR. It just transport you to a different place and a different shared reality that you and I can coexist in. And obviously Mario. We'll see what Nintendo wants to do.
There is that hint towards a VR headset for the Switch.
Right.
Yeah,
but I'm curious what they're going to do.
I think that's... you know what? If anyone's going to do like an awesome VR experience, I would put it on Nintendo. Because imagine if you could play, like if you could be Link in a first-person view exploring Hyrule.
Right.
Then again, you might run into a Pokemon Go situation again where people are walking off cliffs and stuff. Lawsuits.
Right. Well, that's like it's the thing that you kind of come back to in a lot of this, and it's pretty common these days when we joke about like making a $200 million movie about Battleship. Like so much of, but like as ridiculous as that is, so much of what is successful and what gets people's attention is intellectual property, it's IP. Mm-hmm. So like if I'm telling my friend who's a gamer like, oh, you got to try. Got to get the Rift, you got to get the Vive, you got to get the PSVR. And they're like, oh, well, what game should I play? And I'll list a few games. And he's like, all right. But if I said, hey, Zelda's coming to VR, it's $600, he'd be like, all right,
I'm buying Zelda.
So Nintendo has such power that they deserve for creating such great games and such great characters and franchises that I think that it would just really help the VR industry as a whole if they were to get into it in that way and bring these characters we love into virtual reality.